friends, welcome back to another episode of Coffee and Conspiracy. Today we are going to be talking about the food pyramid. Yes, I'm sure we all remember the food pyramid that was plastered all over our middle school and high schools back in the 90s. And there's always a little conspiracy sprinkled behind, I would say, maybe everything the government develops. So we're going to talk about the food pyramid today. One of my sources when researching this article, called Provoke Media, which I did link below, had an interesting opening to the food pyramid. So they wrote, in 1991, pressure from corporate interests prompted the Agriculture Secretary to block the introduction of what was then called the Eating Right Pyramid, which he complained was confusing to children. Nutritionalists were puzzled by this concern because they said the food pyramid was never intended for children to be the audience. For the next year, the battle over the food pyramid became front page news. The process of developing new dietary guidelines began in the 1980s, when two federal agencies with conflicting agendas decided to get together to speak with one voice on nutritional issues. The agency with the most interest in the health consequences of the American diet was the Department of Health and Human Services. But the agency with the actual lead responsibility for nutrition policy was the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which exists primarily to protect the interests of food producers. The research I did, rumor has it that many lobbyists were involved in this process. Grain lobbyists worked to ensure that refined grain was listed at the bottom of the pyramid with whole grain, giving the appearance that they had the same nutritional value. That decision did not come without many people giving criticism. Susan Bowerman, the public domain of Herbalife Nutrition, who's also a registered dietitian and has a myriad other awards in nutrition, points out that the base of the pyramid, being the grain group, was a result of heavily influenced lobbyists' efforts from the grain industry. This led people astray into thinking carbs were separate from fruits and vegetables. She also writes, the type of grain suggested by the pyramid was also a problem. The pyramid didn't emphasize whole grains, and so in some ways it encouraged the intake of refined and processed grains, she adds. And the article there is also linked below if you want to hear more of what she had to say. So refined grains, why does that matter? Why do we want them listed in the same category as whole grains? The main difference between whole grains and refined grains is that the whole grain contains the entire grain, while refined grains have been processed to remove the bran and germ. The bran and germ contain important nutrients like vitamin B, iron, and dietary fiber, which makes the whole grains more nutritious and more filling than refined or processed grains. To make refined grains more nutritious, some manufacturers add some of the nutrients that were removed during processing back in a process called enriching. I'm sure you've all seen like enriched flour, enriched grains on different grocery store packagings. However, fiber is often not added back in with the enriching process. There's no denying that processed foods have definitely become a staple in the American diet and our day-to-day lifestyle. Americans eat between 60 and 90% of their daily calories from processed foods, with ultra-processed foods accounting for more than half of that. Ultra-processed foods are foods that undergo multiple processing steps and contain man-made ingredients like preservatives, gums, fillers, flavors, sugars, salt, and fats. Examples of ultra-processed foods include breakfast cereals, cookies, crackers, frozen dinners, fruit-flavored yogurts, processed lunch meats, and soda. And I'm sure you've probably all seen on the label on certain foods contains bioengineered ingredients. Now, as if we're not all trying to run around, live our lives, live the American lifestyle, be busy, go to all these things and eat ultra-processed foods because that's what's available to us because we like to live our life on the go. Another disturbing fact regarding processed foods specifically is that some Americans are consuming up to a credit card's worth of plastic a week. Now, some say that's an exaggeration, but it's still reported that Americans do consume plastic regularly in our diets. Honestly, when I heard that, I was like, what? But also plastics in our air, plastics in our water, and plastic is in our foods. And really start taking inventory of how many items you consume a week that are wrapped in plastic. I recently listened to a podcast episode, and I'm going to link it below to be the first link on there, that kind of got me into this food pyramid research. It's like an hour and a half. It will change the way you look at food. You definitely need to watch it. It was kind of my inspiration to get some of this information out there to my little audience of friends. So hope you're enjoying this, friends. So most refined or processed foods that we're consuming didn't even exist 75 to 100 years ago. Our bodies were not created to consume or digest these fake processed foods and plastics. End of the day, refined grains and processed grains were listed on the bottom of the pyramid together. So it would lead one to conclude that the lobbying efforts were successful and that Americans were influenced to think that refined grains and whole grains had the same nutritional value because they were on the pyramid at the same place together. Meat lobbies were also involved in the food pyramid process. They wanted to ensure that meat was not listed on the food pyramid on a block with red coloring because red can be associated with danger. Okay, and I do want to talk about meat for just a second because there is a lot of conversation going on about red meat specifically and how processing meat is contributing to the climate change conundrum. So according to Google, globally, cows and other livestock are responsible for 40% of the methane emissions put out into the atmosphere. So of course, we're going to have to come up with some new way to get meat since obviously cows are such an issue to climate change, right? We're talking about 3D printed meat or lab grown meat. And this is where I promise I'm not wearing a tinfoil bow at the moment. This is a real thing. There's actually a website called stakeholder.com. It's plant-based, industrial grade, printing tomorrow's protein today. Step into the future of culinary innovation as we transform how protein is being produced and consumed. They have a commitment to sustainability. They're revolutionizing the way we produce and consume food, making plant-based alternatives that rival traditional meat taste and texture and making nutrition accessible to everyone. And I'll put the thing in here so you guys can see it. So they actually have innovative, like industrial sized printers so you can print your meat. How does it work? Well, according to AI, basically it's taking animal stem cells and fat and muscle cells and putting it into a machine, the 3D printer, I guess. And the cells then are separated into muscle and fat cells, which become bio-ink that's used in a 3D printer. The printer uses bio-ink to create meat cuts based on the company's designs. The final product is then incubated for a few weeks to allow the stem cells to further differentiate and then cooked before it can be eaten. So that's 3D printed meat. Now we also have another solution, you guys, don't worry. I don't know if it gets better or not. Lab grown, AKA cultivated meat. So what is cultivated meat? Cultivated meat is also known as cultured meat. It's genuine animal meat, including seafood and organ meats that is produced by cultivating animal cells directly. This production method eliminates the need to raise and farm animals for food. Cultivated meat is made of the same cell types that can be arranged in the same or similar structured as animal tissues, thus replicating the sensory and nutritional profiles of conventional meat. Yeah. In 2013, Dutch scientist Mark Post unveiled the first cultivated meat burger on live television. 2 years later, the first cultivated meat companies were founded. Now, people might be thinking, you might be listening to me, I've had this discussion with many people. So I'm very pro your local farmers, regular red meat, like honestly, just local farms, like just buy meat from your local farms. I'm telling you guys, look at the labels. If you're still buying food at grocery or buying meat at the grocery store, please make sure you're actually looking to make sure it's meat. So a lot of people will tell me there's no way this is happening, no one's buying into this. Well, listen to this. The industry, lab-grown meat, has since grown to more than 150 companies on 6 continents back in 2022. It's backed by a $2.6 billion investments, each aiming to produce cultivated meat products. Dozens more companies has formed to create technology solutions along with boosting the value chain. But I started researching this thing called meat glue. That's what got my attention. And it's used in about 8 million pounds of meat every year in the United States. The meat glue enzymes has the potential for food safety and allergy implications. It's obviously, this isn't about creating a more nutritional meat for humans. This is about creating something that is going to help the environment, but also it's just industrializing our food more. As we've talked about ultra processed food, we're already consuming so much processed food. We need food the way God originally intended it to be in our bodies, and that is through regular animals and meat or plants outside, just not this grown in a lab, grown inside food. I could talk about meat for a long time, but I'm not going to because it's about the food pyramid. But just again, a little plug. If you live where I live in Virginia, please text me. I will be more than happy to give you a ton of local farms to go buy your meat from. I really do believe if we can get our good protein from local farms, it's gonna make such a difference in your diet and in your body and in how you feel, and it's just so good for you. And we should really be supporting local farms. They're so important, but we'll talk about farms in a different episode. So now we're gonna move on to the food, back to the food pyramid, and we're gonna talk about dairy. Yes, the dairy lobbyists were also involved in the food pyramid. Surprise, surprise. Since processed cheese was less nutritional than unprocessed cheese, or I guess natural cheese, the dairy lobbyists actually got their servings on the food pyramid to be doubled to increase the overall serving sizes because processed cheese was not as nutritional as natural cheese. And we're gonna talk about another passion of mine. I love food, but we're gonna talk about milk, and specifically raw milk. So we're gonna step back in time when you literally just walked outside or walked to your neighbor's house and there was a cow and you just drank the milk that just came out of the cow. You needed milk, there was a cow, you drank it and you enjoyed it. Fast forward a little bit, we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution. So the idea of mass production was coming to fruition, distilleries for milk and spirits was becoming a thing. So as a result of the Industrial Revolution, cows went from living happy lives outside in the sunshine, eating grass with their little families who would milk them and love them, to prisoners basically in factories in these hot distilleries, only eating whatever they were fed. And this resulted in cows producing something called swill milk, which was pale, gross milk that could not be used for butter or making cheese. In order for this milk to be drinkable or usable, they had to alter it in many ways. They added starch to it, they added eggs to it, they added molasses to it. It was being handled by dirty hands. There was no sanitation, there wasn't regulations, and then it was just being sent out for people to consume. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, the quality was terrible, but the money was to be made. For the Industrial Revolution, you knew who had the cow. You could go over and see it. It was your friend, it was your cousin, it was your own cow. You could see the conditions of the cow, you could see how the milk was being handled. You were the person that was keeping someone accountable because you could see it with your own eyes and decide for yourself if it was something you wanted to consume or not. So of course, as a result of the way milk was being handled and the cows were being handled, this swill milk went out and made people very sick. The New York Academy of Medicine conducted an examination and established the connection of swill milk with the increased infant mortality in the city. The topic of swill milk was also exposed in pamphlets at this time. In 1895, commercial pasteurizing machines were introduced for milk to the United States. According to The Untold Story of Milk, by 1917, pasteurization of all milk, except that from cows proven to be free of tuberculosis, was either required or officially encouraged in 46 of the country's 52 largest cities. The proportion of milk pasteurized in these cities ranged from 10% to 97%. In most, it was well over 50%. Now, fast forwarding a little bit further into the future, does anyone else remember the Got Milk campaign? Because I certainly do. I had to research this a little bit more once I learned more about raw milk versus pasteurized milk. And it was interesting. So Got Milk is a government-funded advertising campaign that encouraged people to drink milk and dairy products. The campaign was created in 1993 by the California Milk Processor Board and the Goodbye Silverstein and Partners to increase milk consumption specifically in California. Why did the government want to push people in California to drink more milk? Also, I just want to give a shout out to homogenization. And I'm sure you've all seen milk on it. It says pasteurized. I think it does. I don't get milk from the grocery store now, but it says, I've seen it say homogenized. So I was curious, what is that? So homogenization is the process that gives milk its rich white color and smooth texture. Milk that has not been homogenized contains a layer of cream that rises to the top of the glass, which mine does. You have to shake it. So the process of homogenization saves consumers the step of mixing the cream back into the milk before drinking it. The entire process doesn't impact what's actually in the milk or its flavor. So they didn't want us to have to shake our milk? Like, is it really that big of a deal? I guess they thought it was really inconvenient. I also just want to say, I think it's super interesting that our government, who produced a food pyramid to supposedly help us with our nutrition, makes raw milk illegal or very hard to get, but yet has Kool-Aid easily accessible. And what's in juice boxes? Okay, I'm not gonna hate on Diet Coke too much because I do partake and very much enjoy every now and then, but you're telling me Diet Coke that's full of chemicals and who knows what else is in it, processed sugars, or I guess there's no sugar in it because it's Diet Coke, but whatever, processed stuff, is safer than raw milk? And just because I'm obsessed with milk right now and I'm really into this research, I just want to say the milkman still existed up to the 1970s. So that really wasn't that long ago that you still had someone delivering you fresh milk daily that you would consume right away because you didn't want it to go bad. I also think it's interesting to say refrigerators. So refrigeration of food is very interesting to research, but refrigerators didn't become popular in America until the late 1920s. And by 1944, 85% of households actually owned one. Fun fact, the first refrigerators were available in 1927, but they were very expensive. They cost between $500 and $1,000, which is equivalent to $6,500 or $13,000 today. So of course, refrigerators were luxury items for years. But all that to say, back in the day, food was consumed quickly. People ate whole foods. People ate things that weren't going to last if we didn't have refrigeration, or weren't gonna last if we just let them sit out on the counters. These are in our pantries. These ultra processed food, processed milks, all these things that are lasting us a really long time are less nutritional because they're not the whole food value. Back in the day, you had fresh food that you got from a farm or from a market and you consumed it right away. Therefore, it was more nutritious. We were healthier because we were consuming better, high quality food. And another tangent this food pyramid research took me to is supermarkets or grocery stores. You guys seen Supermarket Sweep? Because that game show I could watch on repeat. I would have been so good at it. If they ever bring it back, I may try to go on because Supermarket Sweep was such a good show. Okay, I hope people know what I'm talking about. That I would be on the edge of my seat. That was such a good show. Anyways, so American supermarkets haven't really been around for that long. In 1936, there were 32 supermarkets in 1,200 states. At the end of 1936, it tripled to about 3,000 in 47 states. And then in the 1950s, it was well over 15,000. Supermarkets basically brought on an era that food was more convenient to get and was a cheaper price. So what that really means is that there was a modern era of less nutritional food because mass production of food had begun. And getting back to the food pyramid, in 1992, these lobbyists finally had all their work done and the food pyramid was born. By 1993, the food pyramid was plastered all over middle schools and high schools. I'm sure you saw them, as we probably, if you would go back through and watch some classic Boy Meets World or Sister Sister, you may even catch the food pyramid in the background of an episode or two. And the possible conspiracy theorist in me just has to make the point, why a pyramid? I'm sorry, but if there wasn't enough controversy around a pyramid in general, you're gonna put our food listed out on a pyramid? Like, I mean, the pyramid's associated with so many conspiracy theories. We have the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill. I'm just gonna say, they could have chosen anything else. So friends, was the food pyramid really created to educate Americans on better nutritional options and healthier lifestyles? Or was it just another wave of government propaganda to support the industrialization of our food so we would think consuming food in a factory was more normal than consuming food that was grown outside in the dirt? I'll let you decide if you need the tinfoil bow or not. Until next time, friends, cheers.